Well, hi, Bob. Hi, Kurt.
Hi, Dave.
Morning.
Good to be with you again.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
It has been. Yeah, we're making our trek decade by decade through the history of Taylor, through your eyes and your experiences. Last time we were together, we talked through the 90s. We finished up talking about the NT neck. I wanted to go back to that just for a little bit because the 90s was a really great decade and saw a lot of acceleration in the business. You guys are innovating in production. You're building the brand, and consumers were really taking notice and buying guitars. But you got to this point that things are moving ahead, and you said, "Wait a minute, let's do this neck joint completely differently now. Let's disrupt this great thing we have going and make it better." Why would you do that?
That was a long process for him to get to the point where he could do that.
Yeah. I think we'd gotten up to somewhere at about 50 guitars a day. I could see that we were going to reach a critical mass of how many guitars we could make and do a good job with the way guitars were made. 50 a day was a lot of guitars. If you think about when we started our business, Martin Guitars was setting records at making, I think it was 80 guitars a day. The most they'd ever made. It was really probably the most, what I would say, good guitars made, 20,000 guitars in a year, like real legit good guitars. And of course that shrunk down a lot during the disco years and the glam rock years, nobody interested in acoustic guitar years, but it started coming back. I felt like, we were reaching a critical mass on being able to make good guitars. Like the idea would be like, if I could sand a neck straight, look down it like you're aiming a rifle, and you see where it's pointing and you see that it's straight. You see the anomalies. I could put frets in. Well, then, I could teach Larry Breedlove how to do it, who worked for us, and Terry Myers. And you could just keep teaching people. But the next thing you know, you've got 15 guys in a room all clank, clank, banging away with hammers. All you hear is clunk, 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 just this, rhythm, just this random banging all day of frets and filing and doing that. And it turns out that you can't teach an ocean of people to do that. There's pretty soon it's like, I can look down a neck and tell who fretted it, right? Because there's a personality to it. That's not what we want. We would want a guitar to look like a Taylor, and not be able to say who did it, right? Because it's all just good. And how do you do that? By building a factory. That's how we do it. Kurt and I went to the Mercedes factory in Sindelfingen years before that in Germany at a trade show. Blew me away, particularly because I looked at this factory and I thought, nobody here that I see working can make a car, but they built a factory. They left no stone unturned, and together they make excellent cars.
Yeah, that was the early 90s, I think.
It was super inspiring to me. So could we do that with guitars? Well, one of the impediments to doing it with guitars is the super low volume, and it's a small business. They were making, out of one plant, they were making 1,700 cars a day. That was just one plant. And that was the same year that GM laid off 70,000 people, right? So to give you the difference in scale.
Yeah.
And when you have scale, you can buy things, you could do stuff, you can invest in engineering. So anyways, I started thinking of the guitar a little bit more that way, like what would it hurt if the neck were more straight? Because there was all this debate going on of handmade versus factory made, and I boiled it down to good made versus bad made. If you could do it better, you can usually do it faster. For example, I could bend sides over a pipe and they'd be ripply and not the right shape, or I could put a machine and bend them and they're perfectly shaped. Like, what would be wrong with that? Right?
It's kind of funny because people can tend to think that if it takes a lot longer, it's going to be better. And it was kind of an eye-opener for me because here are rolls of sheet metal that are a car being driven off the line the next day in Sindelfingen. And
it's amazing.
And you think, is it going to be any good? I mean, that was just a roll of sheet metal, yesterday, and here is a car being driven off the line. Is it going to last, through the warranty? Is it going to be around 20, 30 years from now? And the answer is, well, yeah, because it wouldn't be better if it took longer to make.
When we did the Baby Taylor some years before that, I can't remember how long ago that had been, but 7, 8, 9 years.
Maybe 96-ish, something like that.
5 years, something like that.
Yeah.
I made that neck without a heel, because the heel on an acoustic guitar gets in the way of any kind of machining. You don't have a flat back side of it to machine the top side of it. It'd be like trying to fix your a tennis shoe or something, a high heel or something and so I was always jealous of like a Les Paul neck or a Fender neck that didn't have a heel on it, because they could start with a flat piece of wood. Mm-hmm. So, and at the exact same time, I could see that that mahogany in particular was going to become very hard to get. And this is hard to explain, but the way necks were made were a 3-inch thick piece of wood, and it was cut from a certain part of the tree, and the trees were huge there, and it was what we call flat sawn. So if you looked at the end grain, instead of the grain going like this, the grain went like this. Now imagine a circle like this end table, and the grains, this is the radius. Well, there aren't very many pieces where it runs through like this. So you would cut this 3-inch by 4-inch out of huge trees that were this big around. There aren't trees that big around anymore. And certain parts of that tree had that flat grain. You'd take those boards, cut them 4 inches, stand them up, and the grain would come down in the direction that you wanted the neck to become. And it was particularly hard to get that, and it was particularly hard to train that, because the big giant companies, the huge timber companies that were cutting timber by the shiploads since the early 1800s, right? They're running out of wood, or they were getting run out of town, or people didn't want roads going in there and logging trucks. There's a little bit of a long story, but it is the story of the NT. Mm-hmm. And so in order to get wood, you had to go primitive. You had to really come down to a roadless area in a small community or village where they would cut a tree. And now I'm going to explain to them, and them have the equipment to cut huge trees into these pieces like this that I'm going to lay sideways, bandsaw out a profile of a neck, and I still have that heel, right? I don't want that heel there. And I have to be able to get wood. So it's two things I'm trying to solve at the exact same time. So realize if down in these communities, and they're very small, one little bandsaw that they had to be able to cut logs, chainsaws to cut out some blanks, haul them in on donkeys. They'd bring 2 big giant cants that they cut in the forest into these big chunks, and then they would take them. And if they cut a square, it didn't matter which direction the grain went, because if I didn't like it on this face, I could flip it to that face, and the grain would be the right direction. So then I wanted to cut 3, I'm going to say, Fender neck blanks out of it, and then save a piece right here that I cut 3 this way, and then I could lift that up later in the process, put it onto that for the neck, and the grain would pretty much match. It'd be the same piece of wood, the same nap of the grain. Like if you do this to your corduroys, you have light reflecting different ways. And so you could have corduroys that are the same color, but it looks stripy. And so it's important that the heel come from there. Well, that's solved. Now you could just say, cut this thing this way, like you're chopping an onion, cut it that way, and have pieces that are grain going this way, that way, and this way. And the part that's 45 degrees, you can still use it. Once it gets more than 45, you just roll it. And so we got better wood that way in the modern way, which is a primitive way. No roads are involved, no huge logging is involved, and communication is simple. And then I wanted to make a neck that started out almost like an electric guitar neck, so I could machine from one end to the other and make it straight. What's wrong with straight, right? I wanted to use the incredible CNC machines we had to stress relieve this and to make it flat. When I say flat, I mean flat. I'll tell a little story. We took a machine to a machine shop once and said, we'd like to have this thing surface ground flat. And so they did, and we took it back, and when we set it up and it didn't work, and I put straight edges on it, it wasn't flat. And I took it back and I said, well, this isn't flat. And this, like, kid you not, this is what they said. Well, you just said you wanted it flat. You didn't say you wanted it flat. And, you know, it begs the question, what's the definition of clean?
How flat?
Right.
Yeah, the words don't really mean anything unless you put more qualifiers on them. What's clean? Well, clean, you know, clean to a street is different than clean for your house or your silicon processor, you know, factory or your surgical room. There's a lot of, well, you didn't say clean, you just said clean, right? And so anyway, what I'm talking about, I want to make it flat. I'm talking about flat, right? Like really flat. And so this is the genesis of what we called the NT neck, which stood for new technology, and we called that in-house, and the name kind of stuck. And now we try and call it a Taylor neck, but it never really sticks. We always still call it the NT neck. So in order to do that, we had to build a whole new factory, because the way that we went about doing it also meant that the guitar body had to be different in how the neck attached. And the guitar body had to be more the same geometry from guitar to guitar. Because before you'd make a guitar body, it turns out however it turns out, then you make a neck and it kind of turns out how it turns out. Then you marry those two, and it takes a skilled person with a good eye to measure that, get the right angle, get it nice and flat. And when you've trained a whole lot of people to look down a guitar neck, you don't really know what to do when you say, you see how the treble side has a little right there, and the bass side, it's up in here? And they go, no, I don't see that. Well, what do you do? There's what do you do? Well, so we were working our way up to 75 guitars a day, and I was deep into this project. Terry Myers, who's still with our company as we speak, he's my age. He's been with us forever, and Terry sees that. He sees it clear as a bell, right? And he sees it the same way I see it. We see it the same, which makes it even better, because then we can have conversation. Because if you experience something the same, you can actually go somewhere with that. Like I eat a chili and I don't think it's hot, and you eat a chili and it's real hot, so we don't know which direction to go, right? Because our experience is different. And so he was running that department at that time. And he's like, Bob, it's killing us here. We just can't make so many guitars. I go, Terry, just wait. We're going to have a new method. And that new method, I think, could 10x our production before we need to refine that, before the wheels fall off of that. Wheels falling off, or sometimes I say critical mass. It's just like as big and fast as something can be before you have to do something else. And so that's really the background.
That's how he thinks too. That's how Bob thinks. He's like, this can get us from here to here. I don't know what it's going to take to go from there to there. And he really thinks that way. And so he'll be scratching his head, you know, like we're going to max out doing it the way we do it at this level. What's it going to take to get to that level? And he's like, you know, that's what he's agonizes over, you know, trying to figure it out, because you can't get there doing it the same way.
You really can't. You can't just have, look, we have an ocean of people. While we're talking, we have 1,300 plus employees. During the COVID years, we had 1,500 because the demand for guitars was high, and we wanted to get those guitars to the people who wanted them. And so we made 1,000 guitars a day. And so I got to peek into the future. 1,000 guitars a day. It's funny because I remember telling Terry at 75 guitars a day, I think we'll be comfortable for 10 times this. And somewhere around 750 to 1,000, you're like, okay, we need something better. Now, I think that in the factory, you have really three things that you can do. One is technology, one is organization, and one is training or education. Those are the three legs. And sometimes You want to kind of keep them tight, keep them together. They want to advance together. We have incredible training at Taylor. We have incredible organization. But when I was talking to Terry at 75 guitars a day, the solution was technology. What I'm thinking now is that technology still holds up, but now we need to rely more on training, right? And I think that I've been thinking about a lot of this lately. We might have to really put together a more intense course on what a guitar looks like when you finally put it together.
Establishing
really,
what flat means.
What flat means and what the right angle is. And I'm thinking that the next thing isn't technology on our necks. Although I will say we're doing a lot more treatment to wood now, because wood is not as good as it was back then. Wood back a long time ago, let's say in the 60s or when I first started making guitars, there was a grade of mahogany that was called pattern grade mahogany. And then below that was musical instrument grade, and below that would have been cabinet and flooring and that type of thing. Pattern grade is what they would make the patterns, the molds out of in Detroit to build a car, because it was so stable and so compliant, and you could shave it and it would stay that shape and size. It was so easily carvable. And of course, they don't do that now. They do everything on CAD and computers, and they don't need pattern grade mahogany. And we kind of do need pattern grade mahogany to make a straight neck. Guitar builders forever depended on the very, very best piece of wood to make a neck that would stay straight, to make a body that would stay formed. And that wood doesn't exist. It exists in super small quantities. So yes, if you're listening to this and you think, well, if you go to a luthier, it's like, yeah, go to a luthier. I recommend it. Find a guitar that you love. And there's incredible guitar makers out there really making nice stuff. And they don't need to use the quantity of wood that we do, right? And they're not serving as many people as we need to serve. And so we've gotten into wood modification technology, which is mostly just, I'm going to say, it's heat modification. And it does the same thing that time does. You got to be really good at it. And in some cases, you've got to have some pretty complex machinery, because if you just bake wood, there's torrefaction. People are always into torrefying wood, and you can bake wood and bring it to a certain color. And yes, it's going to make it more stable, but it also makes it more brittle. And so for you to modify part of the wood that you want to modify, but not modify other parts of it so it's not as good. Mm-hmm. For example, wood has this long, bendy characteristic, right? It's springy. And if you modify it through heat the wrong way, it becomes crisp. Start out with a piece of dough, you make a soft loaf. Well, let's just say you don't want to bend a pretzel after it's been baked. You want to wrap it while it's, and then it gets crispy. It doesn't bend anymore, right? Right? It's not flexy anymore. And you can bake it a little bit. You can have a soft cookie or a crispy cookie or a burnt cookie. Well, wood is very much the same. And so we use these slow treatments that we've done for years and years and years. And part of the NT neck process was, how do we treat the wood? How can we make good guitars with straight necks with what the forest has in reality now? What are we going to do about the situation we find ourselves in now? More people want to play guitars than when we started in business nearly 50 years ago, or, it's 49 years now. Yeah. So this NT neck set the stage for us to be able to make good guitars. And Kurt had to go sell them too and develop a market for that too. So,
that was easy.
Yeah, that was not easy at all, to be able to serve dealers and serve clients, and us, we still take care. Every time we make a guitar, we have a client, maybe forever, and that guitar needs to be serviced. And
yeah, we were talking about that last time. All the efforts to build the brand, interact with consumers more throughout the 90s. We knew we would need to do that to sell more guitars in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So the runway for NT was quite long. It wasn't just a couple of years where you're doing the work to get it into production.
It took us, when we finally figured out what that neck was going to be and how we could make it. And so now we're mid-90s working on it. We bought our first Fadal, which people in this industry hear that word a lot, but it's a 3-axis milling machine that a computer runs. It goes up and down in 3 axes, and by moving it, you can move it through all these curves, and it can cut. It just cuts. That's what it does. It just cuts. It cuts where you tell it to cut. Mm-hmm. And if it's complicated, it takes little teeny tiny shavings until it sort of models a shape. And thought this thing could make something that we wouldn't be able to make for that end by hand, because that NT neck is inlaid in the top and inlaid in the side. So you're doing an inlay, not like an inlay on a fingerboard where it's really 2-dimensional. It's 3-dimensional. It's inlaid. It wraps around the corner. And that heel's got to fit into a pocket in that fingerboard. And it's got to look like a regular guitar has always looked. I think that the form of a guitar, I'd always felt that the way a guitar looks has been defined. Oh, we can decorate it with different colors, bindings, but it's a body. It should be pretty. It shouldn't be ugly. There's a difference between an ugly shape and a pretty shape. It should be comfortable. The neck comes down. It has a heel. The fingerboard comes. This is what a guitar looks like. I don't really want to change that. You can contour it, but you can soften it. You can decorate it differently. But I didn't want something that looked, I'll say, weird. Something that, I'm going to try and present a better guitar, but people look at it and go, that's not the way a guitar should be.
Yeah.
And so to design that into a guitar and leave it looking normal was a challenge. But we had to retool the bodies I alluded to a few minutes ago. And part of what makes the NT neck work is that the body is more, the shape is more controlled than it was before. Whereas before, like I was mentioning, you build a body, it turns out the way it turns out. You build a neck, it turns out how it turns out. You fit those two things together and you marry them. But this neck will never fit on that body. But the NT neck, you had to build a better body. So it wasn't just a neck. We had to retool. I say the only thing left in that factory that was the same as it was before NT was the pencil, and absolutely everything else.
And, that's where it started. If I think back to, when we started the American Dream, it was a template and a pencil.
Yep.
And you put the template on a piece of wood, you draw the pencil line, and then you cut close to it with the bandsaw, and then you sand it. So I would say that from my perspective, the beginning of achieving the Bob's new neck design, which internally we call the NT neck, now we call it the Taylor neck. This started all the way back then with the template and the pencil, and how can I do this better and have it turn out better and be more consistent and teach other people to be able to do it too. I mean, it goes back to that. Mm-hmm. And not only the Taylor neck, but the bodies became so standardized that he has buffing programs, to hold the body and buff it on the buffer. Now, if every body was a little bit different, if this one's a 16th wider, you're going to buff right through the finish and into the wood. Yeah. So the standardization of that led the way to a lot of improvements to be able to make more guitars that were easier to train people to make, that were more consistent quality.
That's right. And, a lot of there's two things, there are two truths that are opposing each other in reality. And I think a lot of times human intelligence can be defined by being able to manage opposing truths, right? And here's two truths about making something. There's an economy of scale. We know that. We always hear about, well, this is going to get cheaper as the scale goes up. That's true. What's equally true is it costs more as the scale goes up. For example, you want to make a lot of guitars in today's world, you better get ready to start spending a whole lot of money on cybersecurity, on advanced computer applications and server power to be able to deal with all of the stuff that comes your way that's soft that you don't even see, or the amount of money that you spend on training or tools or R&D that a person in a shop doesn't have. They don't need cybersecurity.
Also, it used to be in doing the budgets, if you go way, way, way back, the labor would be a much bigger component in making a guitar than overhead would be. Now, overhead is everything from rent, insurance, supplies, power.
Me?
Well, you're actually not overhead, Dave. You're a sales expense.
You're a sales
I'm talking about factory overhead expenses.
Oh, okay.
Okay, indirect labor, which is people, in the factory that aren't actually hands-on making
Gotcha.
a guitar.
Yep.
Supervision, managerial people. So then we crossed a line quite a while ago where overhead altogether is a much bigger dollar amount than labor per guitar, because you work hard and getting more efficient, being able to make guitars more efficiently. The labor component can go down, right? But then the offsetting part of the expense of being able to do that is your overhead goes up. Mm-hmm. So overhead now is many times what labor is per guitar.
It's almost like when you have that $100 beer when you're in Tokyo and you're like, I just paid $100 to have beer. No, you paid $100 to have beer in the Ginza, in the most expensive real estate in the whole entire world, on the 10th floor, looking out over the thing, and pay those people's expenses to do that.
Yeah, that's the overhead of the location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's complicated. It's not a simple formula that someone can work out. And I think that this discussion about the NT neck, what I've said isn't hype. It's the true, real story of being in business, making a product, figuring out what's next. If I don't figure out what's next, someone's going to catch up to where I was. So you go, okay, well, in China, their labor is, someone could make that argument, but everything they use is also associated with that labor. The materials that they use that are made in China have that lower cost. Their real estate has that lower cost. Their rent has that lower cost because everything's a little bit cheaper there. Mm-hmm. And so I've got people in factories around the world that are on our tails. So we have to move forward, and we continue to move forward.
You saw, we were talking off camera, you saw the limitations of the way you were building guitars at that time. Mm-hmm. And said, we've got to figure out a way to allow ourselves to do more. And I asked you, how did you battle just being content where you were? The business was going great. The 90s were good. It was a strong decade. And I'm curious, were these discussions you guys would have together? Like, we really got to push. Or was it just innate in both of you? Like, no, we're charging ahead. You had your complementary areas of the business you were managing, but were these discussions of, we should really sit back and no, we should press ahead? What was that? Were those discussions, or was it just, you guys were in it to win it and we're going to keep pushing ahead?
Not every year is the same. There's some years that are easier, everything aligns. There's some years that are harder. I say, out of every 5 years, there's a really difficult year, there's a fairly easy year, and 3 years that are challenging, kind of right in the middle, like normal business challenges. So, there isn't any time to sit back and be content. I mean, things don't just chug along. I mean, you have to keep reinventing the business. You keep having to solve problems. Things don't just automatically sell every year and automatically get made. It's like Bob will say, he'll see brand new challenges, problems on the factory that he's never seen before in 50 years, mm-hmm. And the world keeps changing, mm-hmm. right?
Yep.
I say this all the time. In fact, I say it more often now than I used to. But when people say, what's the secret to the success of Taylor Guitars? I say it's our partnership, because I didn't have to ask Kurt to figure out better systems for what it is that he does for our company. Mm-hmm. He did it automatically. He did it on his own. He did it from his own volition, from the things that he wants out of the company. And Kurt might come and say, man, our factory overhead's getting too high. Our gross margin is shrinking. But he's just giving me information because I'm predisposed to want to make that better, right? So him and I were fortunate to do this together because the guitar company's not really easy. When I think of how complicated a guitar is compared to an iPhone or a car, it's actually pretty simple. But on the other hand, gosh, Harley Davidson has come out to try and learn how we finish a guitar. I mean, everybody can learn something from everybody. We make this high tolerance machine, if you want to kind of get dispassionate about it, out of wood that really doesn't want to cooperate with what we're asking it to do, right? And we have to tame that in and make lots of them so that they're the same. We both want it to be better, which is a real blessing that we have that.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with him, but I always answer it differently. I say, the secret of our success is his guitars, because there wouldn't be anything without his guitars. I mean, what if he and I decided, what if he didn't make guitars? Like, hey, Bob, let's start a company. Okay, cool. What do you want to do?
Yeah,
there would have been nothing.
Well, they're both that important. Imagine a lot of companies that the people who are in charge of the money and the sales don't really honor what's happening in the factory. That's not a good situation either. Kurt's always been a huge fan of what I do for the factory.
That's actually something that we experience today when you start your job at Taylor Guitars. You do production onboarding. You go through the factory, and you're actually doing some operations that you probably shouldn't be doing. But from day one, you have an appreciation of what the craftspeople downstairs, as we call it, are doing.
That's true. And even when we had corporate aircraft, the pilots and the flight attendant did the onboarding and worked on making guitars.
And they loved it.
It was
very
important.
cool.
That was the purpose of having those aircraft, was to further the business.
Yeah.
And if you ask them, they were kind of like, oh yeah, we make guitars. That's what we do. Instead of, well, I work for a company that makes guitars and I fly their plane. No, it turns into we make guitars, which, by the way, it just flashed in front of me, West 48th Street, New York City. We sell guitars. I mean, what a name of a business,
No guessing about that, right? Well, thinking of taking the business forward, 2000, Tecate enters the picture. And I'm sure the thought process was similar to, what's going to get us to that next level? What are our limitations, and how do we remove them? Talk to me about how Tecate came to be.
It was him.
Well, it was a future move for me. And I think that was the first time I ever thought of and used the phrase, in 10 years, we'll be glad we did. Because I really couldn't produce some type of ROI sheet on that. Kurt was preoccupied with other stuff, and I said, I'm gonna go ahead and do this. We're gonna find a little place. He participated in coming down and just sort of learning the environment and how business works in Mexico. We went and visited Fender, and they talked a lot. They showed us a lot.
In Ensenada?
In Ensenada. And we got a good look there. We decided we wanted to be in Tecate because we're so close to the border that it wouldn't make sense for us to not have a factory close to the border. And Martin has a factory in Navajoa, which is just south of Ciudad Obregón. And it's so far away from the border, and they're so far away that they can't go every day. They can't drop by for an afternoon. When they go, they send a few people. They have to let it run a little bit on their own. They do a great job with that. But if we're a 30-minute drive from the border of Tecate, and then we put something 2 hours farther south, there goes those afternoon visits, right? And so we decided that was the place, and then we began to investigate just the structure of the business. And at that point, I thought, well, let's find a thing, and we're going to start with some very, very simple things. The first thing was we're going to build a milling department, and they would be able to do something like dry our fingerboards, right? That's the simplest thing you can imagine. Cut a few braces, very simple, and make cases.
So guitars weren't even a twinkle in the eye yet, or were they?
Long-term vision.
Yeah.
Long-term version.
Okay.
That definitely I'll tell the end of this or the beginning of the story. We didn't make a guitar till 7 years after that. Okay, so I'll reveal that now. But we started with making cases, and the way that we did it is the manager of our case factory in El Cajon, named Salvador Lozano. He was a U.S. citizen, but had come from Mexico, and he became a U.S. citizen. But he was Mexican, understood Mexicans. And what we did is we made some new workbenches, and then they started working overtime, put a couple people on, and they put 8 weeks or 10 weeks worth of cases in stock for us over a period of a year. And then we literally got a bus. And one day we hired, I think we had 14 people in that factory. We hired 14 people in the new factory. And every day we took our whole entire case factory to Tecate, and one-on-one, they each trained a person.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that. That's right.
And then they came back home on a bus. Now, that couldn't have happened if we were a plane flight away, or hours away, because we can get to the factory in less than an hour, factory to factory. And so we trained them, and we did that for 6 weeks. It was a real sacrifice for all the employees. And then they came back, and they started making the baby Taylors. And we did that for a while, and then we started moving baby Taylors there. We gave them more milling jobs, and you've got to go through a lot of drama when you start something. You hire some people to be the managers, and you hire some, and next thing you know, it's to find people that have good chemistry and can work kind of on their own, not take advantage, not have, the Lord of the Flies on the island sort of divide into two camps and, this type of thing. And so you have to squelch that. And it took a few years for things to just calm down and for it to be a business.
Yeah, you have to just start. You can't shoot for perfect when you start. You have to just start.
That's true. That's why I like to say anything worth doing is worth doing poorly, right? And you can't keep doing it.
Because you will do it poorly.
It's a very well-known quote amongst Taylor guitars, by the way.
Yeah, well, because you're not going to be good at it when you first start. And you're not going to get anything done unless you're ready to start before you're ready. You just got to start.
Boy, and that's what we did all the early years, too. I mean, I didn't know how to do books. I didn't know how to sell. We didn't know how to make guitars. We didn't know how to do anything. We just started doing it poorly.
That factory slowly grew. And after 7 years of just milling and making guitar cases and working out the kinks, and maybe we're slow at building factories because some people build factories fast. Elon Musk got to the rockets to outer space. Yeah, there's some people that I'm just not that caliber. We do a pretty good job of kind of an elusive project in a small market, teeny tiny market with a lot of effort.
We don't have the level of capital.
We don't have that level of capital. And so anyways, we decided that baby Taylors could move there because we could start. And we start at the back of the production. So we would take finished bodies and necks down there, and all they had to do was do final assembly and put the neck on set, and we were able to concentrate on that. And we just moved our way backwards into where they were making. Well, we moved our way backwards a little bit, and then we started having them make something like a body. I think they met in the middle, but it's starting at the end of the production is the way that I think is easiest.
Kurt, I wrote your quote down. We just started doing it poorly.
Yeah, I mean, how can you do otherwise?
Yeah. And once you already have a brand, you have a business, and you have a quality standard that you have to do you have to be able to make some things poorly that can be fixed or don't matter so much. For example, we could learn how to dry ebony furs, and then we could go down and check it and go, you what? Okay, do it again. And it didn't make it onto a product, right? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
You gotta take baby steps. Do things that have more leeway to be done over or take longer to get it right or that type of thing.
But you had to be totally committed to it. You know, the concept of the third owner, right? You want to be the third owner, but you're the one investing all that early capital, not knowing just how it's going to pan out, but you got to be committed to it. And
I don't want to do all that startup work.
Yeah.
And lose it all so that somebody else can walk in, pick up where we left off and have an easier go of it. We want to be that someone else. And it's slow. And, we've done Tecate wasn't the last thing that we did that's like that. And still, even today, there's things that we start real slow.
It's been 23 years. Are you glad you did it?
Yeah.
Oh, are you kidding? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a vital part of our business. And there's 700 people in Tecate that have a job making guitars at a good company. And this is one of the things that I particularly love about a growing business is that you become responsible for more people. You can help more people work. What are we without work? We all need to get up and work. We have to do something, right? And you help them work, provide money for their life, become a responsible working citizen, taking care of their families and themselves, and to be able to do it not just in El Cajon, but around the world, even down to the people who sell our guitars or repair them, Well,
speaking of guitars, there were some new design elements in the 2000s, inlaid designs. Jim Kerlin mentioned a gentleman, Pete Davies Jr., to me. Can you tell me how things were evolving in the design front, the aesthetic elements of the guitars in the 2000s?
Some of those are to come up with more things to sell, and others are just projects that we're passionate about, like Liberty Tree guitar. Bob wasn't going to let that one go when he saw the opportunity to buy that wood. Others are like doing signature model guitars.
Did a lot of those in that era.
You have relationships with artists, and it's an opportunity to have more guitar models that you can sell, and artists like participating, helping us with it. So we haven't been doing any of those lately because they tend to sell in small numbers unless you're, like a Fender with Eric Clapton or Martin with Eric Clapton or whatever. But you want to talk about the Liberty Tree a little bit? Bob was all about that.
Yeah. And before I do, just to riff off of one comment, we also, when we hired Andy, which we haven't gotten to really talking about Andy, but when we brought Andy on, me in particular, and I think everybody agreed that I wanted the world for Andy to be the famous person, that the signature guitar was what Andy wanted to do with Taylor guitars. And we halted almost every signature guitar that there was and fancy artistic guitars because I wanted to focus on Andy's guitar building ability and for the guitar and Andy Powers to be what we put forth, right?
Yeah.
And I think Kurt probably remembers us going that direction. So there was a very purposeful move around 2010-ish, 11-ish to just kind of stop doing that because I wanted to be all eyes on Andy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, also, who is going to buy a guitar that's done to some artist spec? Is another artist going to buy that guitar? No, it's going to be a fan of the one artist. So that's what makes it a little bit smaller market, unless you're really like an Eric Clapton, like I said before. Maybe that's different with electric guitars. I don't really know. I mean,
maybe it is.
Acoustic guitars are different.
Well, there were times when we just needed sales. He said,
Absolutely.
It's like,
Yeah.
we need to make something that'll put a little pizzazz out in the market right now. And here's something. And dealers love these kind of guitars. And we did it. He mentioned that Liberty. Did you want to say something there?
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, that's how limited edition guitars started originally. Like the fall limited edition guitars we've done. It's a model that you can create as another guitar to sell.
Yeah.
I mean, you see the car makers do it too. They'll do a limited run of this and that, and they use it to sell, parts from. They're ending a run too, like Porsche does. But yeah, and when sales are really, really strong, you tend to not see us do limited edition guitars. Like this last year or so, coming down off COVID this year, we've done more because you have to somehow stimulate sales, come out with something that's a really good value that you're not going to make very many of to get to move someone to check it out and perhaps purchase another guitar.
Yeah, guitar players are like that.
They are.
A
Thank
new
goodness.
shiny object.
Thank goodness.
To fixate on is a
Yeah.
good thing. Yeah, you betcha. Well, should we talk about the Liberty Tree? That's something that's still talked about today.
It's kind of iconic. Their 1999 Hurricane Floyd came through the Baltimore area, Annapolis, Maryland area, and it did enough damage to the last standing Liberty Tree in the United States that they had to take it down. It was on the campus of St. John's College, and it had been nurtured and been in sort of, hospice care for 50 years or longer. It was hollow in the middle, and they'd poured concrete in it to help hold it up.
Yeah.
And these types of things.
For reference,
And-
the Liberty Tree,
So
for those who aren't aware.
So the Liberty Trees were when the Sons of the Revolution got together, 1773, I think it was, and said, we need to win our independence from Great Britain. They identified a tree in each of the 13 colonies and called it a Liberty Tree. And those trees are where was their meeting place. It was their chat room. It was all they'd have to do is say, meet at the Liberty Tree in Boston, and the people from Boston would come there. They'd have their rallies and they'd plot and they'd, do everything that they need to do to work up the nerve, I suppose, and get organized. And in the first 6 months of the war, the Liberty Trees had so much sort of symbolic power that the British cut down 6 of them in the first 6 months.
And you can still see, as I understand it, plaques on the side of buildings that, here stood the Liberty Tree.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't realize, but our first American flag was a Liberty Tree flag. And then came the Betsy Ross flag that we all think of as our first flag. So the Liberty Tree flag is inlaid around the sound hole of the Liberty Tree guitar. And it's a banner, right? And it has stars and stripes. And then we moved to the flag that we know of now. But it was a big deal. And they all eventually died a natural death. Trees don't live forever, except for the one, St. John's College, that had been kept alive. And that tree came down. The college, I don't want to speak for them, but what it appeared like is this was a relief for them because it was kind of put on them to take care of that tree at all cost, whether it's in the way, whether it's not in the way. It was this sort of something like, oh, okay, wow, a lucky strike here. and a tree cutter came in, they took it down, they hauled it off to a dump. Now, prior to that, Emery from
Note, Appalachian Bluegrass Shop.
Appalachian Bluegrass in Baltimore sent me an article and said, you should try and get this tree. Well, when you want something, you can't get it, especially if it ever stood on any type of public property or feels like it, you can't do it. And I made a couple phone calls and no, but I also believe that sometimes things just come to you if you just relax, right? And literally a couple of years went by and I got a phone call from a guy who was really just a landscaper named Mark Menert. And he said, have you heard of the Liberty Tree? And I go, of course I have. He goes, well, I have a bunch of it. And it turned out that he saw that thing happen and he went to the dump and collected that. Now, when I say, when you want something, you can't have it, he had to show the color of his blood and do a whole lot of things to get that tree out of the dump. right?
Wow.
And then he had to spend money on a warehouse to put it in and clean it and debug it and do all
Wrap
these
it in
things.
plastic to keep it from drying too quickly.
One thing led to another, and I bought a bunch of huge chunks of wood. These are just, they weren't logs. This tree was a shell. It had thick pieces, and they're broken and nasty. And went back and picked the ones that I wanted, paid him money for it. And
What kind of wood was it?
it's a wood called tulip poplar, and it's in the poplar family, but more color in the wood. And way back in the day, instruments were made out of it. Gibson made instruments from tulip poplar. You know, it's a legitimate wood. It's it's softer than maple, maybe about the same texture as mahogany, you know. And we cut this stuff up and started designing guitars. And this is one of the things that Pete Davies Jr. did for us. His father, Pete Davies, was one of our machinists, and his mother, Judy Davies, was working for us building our tailorware department.
Yeah.
So we had the
Super
whole family.
nice people.
Really super nice people. And they called him PT, so we called him PT. So PT was he was a good tattoo artist, he could draw hot rods and cars and tattoos and that kind of thing. And you could, and I think that if you're going to do artwork on a guitar, probably a tattoo artist is the closest you're going to get to someone who could draw something that is ethereal, that fits in weird places, because they put stories on people's fingers and arms and shoulder blades, and I mean, their palette is a different shape and size every time, and it's always moving, just like putting stuff on wood. Your fingerboard is what you have to work with. You got to be able to get that thing. It's like looking through a narrow window, in a house and seeing what's out there, and hopefully you see enough to tell the story, right? And so Pete drew this stuff. We just talked about it, and he put the flag on it. He put the Declaration of Independence, and now we're using our laser. Remember, we talked about the laser for baby Taylors a long time ago. All I wanted to do was sort of to make a little decoration around the sound hole and see if it was useful for something. Now we lasered the words in perspective on a scroll, on the Declaration of Independence inlaid onto that guitar, And if we hadn't done Baby Taylor, that 10 years, we'll be glad we did, never would have happened for that technology that we can use for something else. So that guitar was successful. We made 400 of those guitars. We sold them quickly. We donated money to an outfit called American Forest. They used it to, it was a couple $100,000 or something that went to them, if I remember correctly. They planted a lot of trees, but they also helped us collect seeds from underneath that tree. And there was already a seed.
Oh, that's cool.
That there was already a son or daughter of the Liberty tree growing on the property that was big. So St. John's had one of those. And they took them down to their nursery in Florida, and they propagated 14 new trees, which we repatriated a Liberty tree. There was a different species in every colony, but we had 14 Liberty trees. 13 went back to colonies, and one went to the White House Botanical Gardens.
Oh, that's cool. I've forgotten about that.
In fact, we even did a tour where I think we held ceremonies at about 7 of the other colonies, some that were plantings, and some of the cities were, the city arborist was like, I don't want to be the one to kill the Liberty tree. I want this thing to stay at the nursery till it's a little bit bigger, then we'll transport it up, because not on my watch am I planting that little thing that's 2 feet tall in the middle of a city park. Yeah. I'm not doing it. I don't want to get a bed and sleep by it for the next 4 years.
Did that 400 include the baby Taylors that we did with it?
No, we did 400 baby Taylors too.
Did we?
We sliced. Steve McMahon gave us some help.
Okay.
We took some chunks. We sliced veneer and made those, and then we had extra tops, and we made 50 T5s, and each one of them was a state. So there was a California Liberty Tree guitar and an Alabama. And there was a 51st, or maybe it was a Zero guitar that was the advanced prototype when it was all done. And it's not, and I own that guitar. Okay. And it has no state applied to it.
Okay, yeah, I gave up my state. I forget what it was going to be, Montana or something, because Frank Lee wanted it badly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they went to Hong Kong.
You'll see them for sale on...
Keith Brawley, we found one years ago in Hamburg, Germany. Mm-hmm. Dealer had one. Keith bought it. Mm-hmm. I think he got it $4,000, which was cheap.
Really cheap, because the ones I see now are 10 or more.
Yeah, 20. I've heard a number of them selling around 20.
Yeah.
Do you remember what they sold for originally?
$8,999.
Okay.
$98. We don't do the 99. We do the 98.
Okay.
I think they were 80. They were either 84.98 or 89.98. Because once you pass 85, you might as well go to 89. Yep. You just might as well.
And it was another guitar to sell. I mean, we have to design guitars to have guitars to sell, but it was a passion project for Bob and the company.
And a great story.
Fabulous story. Bob wanted to do it super badly.
Yeah, that was the only sort of historical tree. We get opportunities now and then. A tree that was in, the county, the oldest. Well, we did a couple trees for the city of Poway, right next door to El Cajon, of their Poway oak. We made
Cujo.
The Cujo guitar.
Cujo guitar, the tree that was in the Cujo movie.
Those were Larry Breedlove days when he was designing the inlays.
So let's elaborate on the Cujo, because that's another one of those.
That was a cool one. I don't think I have one. I'd like to have one.
Yeah, we have one at work. Oh, I have one in my collection.
Yeah.
I have one. So Cujo was a Stephen King novel about a rabid dog turned into a movie. And in that movie, it was filmed at a little farmhouse up in Central California. And outside of that house was a big old giant tree. And there was a lot of scenes with that tree in it. And even a scene where that tree was dogs on one side and she's on the other side, trying to not get bit by Cujo, who's gone rabid and terrorizes, this woman in the house and her children. And
we got us in touch with Stephen King too.
Yeah,
to get his permission, we made him a guitar, and then I remember he played with his group. Forget the name of the group. He played the guitar.
Yeah, the remainders, the last. What do they call it in the bookshelves? Maybe they're called the last remainders. I can't remember. It's more than one word.
That's the name of his band.
Yeah, because when you're an author, the remainders are the books that didn't sell. They pack them up and send them back to you, right? And so Dave Barry is in that band with Stephen King, and he played guitar. Maybe he had a Taylor. But I got a call from a buddy of mine named Skylar Phelps, who is basically a prospector for wood and gems and fossils. And he just said, "Bob, I just got the Cujo guitar." "What?" "I got the Cujo guitar." "I don't know what you're talking about, Skylar." "The Cujo guitar. It was in the movie. I just took down that tree. It was getting ready to fall on the house. You want it? You should make guitars out of it." So these things, they just fall in your lap sometime. And it was the first sort of thematic guitar based around wood. So that guitar was made out of the wood from that movie. And then it moved on to, inlays and designs for artist guitars we're doing. And then we, with PT's talent, we thought we would do this series that we call the Gallery series. And the first guitar we did was a koi fish guitar. And it was stained blue. And we used all these colored, beautiful Italian resins that you can do inlay work with. And all of the resins that you could put together like a jigsaw puzzle or paint by numbers to become koi fish. And they swam down the fingerboard and came off the fingerboard and then swam around the sound hole like they were in a pool. The guitar was translucent blue, and we made 100 of those. And as we speak right now, we can come back to this way later, but as we speak right now, that koi fish guitar, I had one of my own, and it was in my hallway. And it was when Taylor was 18 or so, and Taylor Swift. And you can say Taylor and everyone will probably think Taylor Swift, just saying that name. But we'd been working with her for a little bit. She'd been playing at our NAMM shows, and she was really starting to get going. And I gave that guitar to her for a Christmas present. And I remember her calling me on Christmas Day. We were opening presents. She's 3 hours ahead. And it's like, I just unwrapped this guitar. And, it was really neat. She was young then. And she played that guitar a lot, put it in the Hall of Fame in Nashville, Country Music Hall of Fame, I guess. Anyways, recently it disappeared out of there, and all of her fans were wondering where it went and hoping that maybe it would show up on her Eras tour, which it did, and they just went crazy. So her playing that has introduced a whole lot of, we made 100 of those guitars and people bought them. It was really my favorite. Yeah. And there are a lot of people that know what that Koi Fish guitar is now.
Especially after this past year.
Yeah, with the Eras tour. She plays it on the
full of people seeing that guitar.
70,000 people. And you see reels of people just going nuts. It's the Koi Fish guitar. The whole stadium just goes crazy. Her dad called me to tell me that the very first concert, there was this sort of palpable hope going around all of the chat rooms that maybe she's going to play the Koi Fish guitar because it's been missing out of there. And when she did, he said the stadium erupted. So that was kind of fun. And then we made, in the gallery series, we did 3 other guitars and they had nautical themes. There was sailing ships and sea turtles and gray whales and that type of thing.
That's right. Yeah, those are cool.
They were really cool. And, people, the first one, dealers and customers like, what's the second one going to be? And by the time we'd done 4, it was kind of like, okay, that's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quit while you're ahead.
They weren't exactly easy to make either.
They weren't easy to make.
What kind of wood was the one with the sailing ship?
It was ziricote.
Ziricote, okay.
Which is not rosewood looking wood. It's a Central American hardwood that's not in the Dalbergia family, but it kind of has a Brazilian rosewood look.
Does it crack easily?
Cracks easily, yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's really easy for a luthier making one guitar to have a piece of wood that's prone to cracking, because they can work the wood and you can fix those things as you go, but not we can fix them in a factory, but it causes it's like somebody stumbling in a line into a Disney ride or something. It sort of messes up the line.
Doesn't flow.
Yeah, so we tend to avoid it. We learned on that 100 guitars that we don't want to make guitars from Ziricote on a normal basis.
What's cool about they were high profile. I mean, which is what we've been talking about. They've become, the market has decided they're collectible. Mm-hmm. I don't like it when manufacturers try to preordain something as being collectible, because you can't really do that. The market decides that after time that something is cool and values it. I know our salespeople would like it if we did more things like that. They sell well. They kind of stand the test of time.
Let's just have a business meeting right here. I'm ready to do that again because we proved Andy. The reason that I took him off the menu was because I wanted people to buy Taylors for the Andy Powers guitar making aspect of what they were and what they were morphing into. And so
we've established that.
Pardon me?
We've established that.
Yeah, it's like, Andy Powers, any questions? Doing some more stuff like that. It's tricky to find the artist.
Totally, because Andy can't do everything.
No, he can't. That would be way too much for him. Yeah. And unfortunately, PT passed away a few years ago.
Motorcycle accident on his Harley.
Yeah, it's just the saddest thing. And he wasn't working for us at the time. His true love was building hot rods. He had an opportunity to move to Portland, Oregon, and work for a shop that really made nice stuff. And PT was a talented young man. And living in the right time and the wrong time. You know what I mean? The right time where you could build really, really cool stuff. But he he was a retro guy, really retro. He dressed it, Brill cream in his hair, bowling shirts, wide belt, blue jeans, that kind of a thing.
Did he have a wallet with a chain?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. But a lot of those guitars that we made during that time were good. They were really fun. And we couldn't have done it without P.T. Davies. We couldn't have done it.
Those were fun, and they were numbered. They were all numbered.
Yeah. And, one guitar that's really, speaking of collectible, that we never thought would be that, is the Dan Crary model. When people, you're nodding big time. That guitar turned out to be a good guitar that people really love. And when they find an old one and they buy it, it's like, I got a Dan Crary model. And those guitars.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool.
It's a really great example to put to bed the idea, and I've talked about this a lot. Do guitars really sound better when they get older? The answer to that is yes, definitely yes, right? And those guitars sound great.
Well, we're talking about artists, and you brought up the Cujo guitar, so we have to go there. But you could trace the presence of that Cujo guitar in front of hundreds of thousands of people this past year to the fact that you answered a phone call a number of years ago. Just nonchalant. You just picked up the phone and said, hi.
Yeah.
Can you
Angel
take us through
was
that?
Our receptionist even in those days, like she is now. And she's like, Bob, I have this guy on the phone who's called a couple times. He really wants to talk to you about his daughter. And I go, okay, I'll talk to him, pick up. And it's like, hi, my name's Scott Swift. And, I know that every father says this about their daughter, but my daughter really is special. And I think she was 13 at the time or something like that. And he goes, can I just send you a cassette tape of some of the songs? And, by the way, I referenced before, and I don't know if I've said this on these podcasts, but when I wrote this little book 12 years ago called Guitar Lessons, and they were just business lessons that I felt I learned along the way at Taylor Guitars, there was one chapter called The Belly Up Years. And you're not really sure, like you think it's going to be talking about the super lean years, but it's really the story of artist relations. And we have a club here in town called The Belly Up. And if you look at the graph of somebody's musical career, a lot of people, well, I'll just say it's a cool club. And they play the belly up on the way up, and they play the belly up. I don't like to say on the way down, but after the height of their career is over, after the peak.
After the COVID years.
Yeah. So artists, they're great when they play the belly up. And if you draw a line across those two things, they play the belly. When they live in the rare air, when they're playing the stadiums, they're not playing the belly up. And I get it. But they do play the belly up here, and those are good years. Those are the years that our relationship with an artist is the most personal and the most important, the ones where what we can do with them and for them matters more than up here. Mm-hmm. It just does. It's just the way it is. And I enjoy those years. I like them. Taylor Swift was just maybe coming into, she wasn't in the belly up years.
She was
then.
pre-belly up.
She was pre-belly up. She was her dad calling to see if somebody who makes a guitar, because he'd already bought her some A or more than one Taylor guitar. 12-string Taylor. And she's like, this is the one I want, Dad. I mean, that family moved from where they lived to Nashville for her. And she knew what she wanted to do.
So she's 13 and playing one of our 12 strings.
A jumbo 12-string,
wow.
Yeah.
I remember meeting her in 1940 with her mom.
Yeah.
And she was like in middle school or something.
Yeah.
She came right up and looked me in the eye and shook my hand.
Oh, she was greatest. She was just great. And
and then shortly after that, we invited her to play at our NAMM booth. And it was just her on a stool, and we have a price list where she's on the cover. We use the image of her on the cover, just by herself, pre-band, just sitting on a stool in our booth, playing and singing her songs.
Yeah, Mike Bayer, who was corporate attorney for Fender for a long time, and now he's corporate attorney for Yamaha. He's become a friend. But the first time I sort of met him outside of there, really meeting Mike, he was down here. He called and we had some lunch. And he said, the first time I met you, I go, no, I don't remember the first time I met you. And he said, I was just milling outside your booth at NAMM show, and you came out and you grabbed me and you said, I need an audience. I've got this girl on a stool and nobody's in there. And we have 50 seats and nobody's in there. And he said, you went around out there and you just drug people in. Do me a favor, come in and listen, come in and listen. And they came in and listened to Taylor Swift's play her guitar and sing. And so there are things that we can do for an artist. We didn't know she would be who she is, but she had good music. Her dad was right. She was special. And in those circumstances, we can help elevate somebody. Her mother, Andrea, was sitting on the, front, row, waiting for Taylor to sit on the stool and strum and play these songs. Those little additions that we can do to somebody are important. We're not the reason she became Taylor Swift, but it was really fun to watch her ascent. That was fun, and we had a good relationship with Taylor, and we helped a lot. And then through her whole career, as she's changed, she's added Gibson guitars to what she plays, and so you see her playing a lot of Gibsons, and it's also a demonstration about how we feel about artists. We don't ever want to lock artists into playing our guitars.
She's an artist. She can play whatever she wants.
They can play whatever they want. We're just here
to
help
service them
if we can help. Right.
Yeah, I remember that at the NAMM show on her pool, sitting on her stool. She's like, and this one's for my homies, Bob Taylor and Bob Barbonas.
Yeah. and my daughter, Natalie, we were talking about it the other day when we were talking about Taylor Swift, and she said, that was the show when you said, Natalie, you have to come up here because I have this girl. She's about your age, and she might feel a little bit lonely, and I want to make sure that you hang out with her and just make her feel comfortable the whole entire time. And I still have a picture of an 8x10 of Natalie and Taylor together,
cool.
When they're both, Natalie's got her braces and Taylor's 14 and Natalie's 13 or something. Or no, Natalie must have been 15 because she's a couple of years older than Taylor.
Then a few years later, she had her band. She played on our NAMM stage with her whole band, too.
Well, yeah, and she also released her Fearless album with a concert at Taylor Guitars. That was her
country radio.
Release.
Oh, wow.
Country radio contest.
But that first NAMM show, she was just a young girl traveling across the country with her mom to
Came
play
out
the
here
Taylor
to play.
booth.
Yeah. And then the next time she played at NAMM, she shut down Catella, the street outside. I mean, it was a big deal. It was a big deal.
Yeah, I have a fun photo of my folks on either side of Taylor Swift and at the Fearless release party. Remember she took photos with everybody?
Yeah. And I reminisced with her dad just a few weeks ago. I go, Scott, you must, I see her now, you see her now, doing what she's doing, changing the economy of cities, having cities around the world feeling left out and demanding that she come play their city because they want the $380 million boost to their economy that everybody else is getting on average for one of her concerts, And I go, to think that it started with you saying, but my daughter really is special, Wow. Would you listen to this tape, Yeah,
what does he say?
What's that?
What does Scott say?
He's like, I think about it all the time.
It's amazing.
Thinks about it all the time.
Unbelievable.
And he always says, and you should hear what she's writing now. Every time he says, you should hear what she's writing now. It's her best ever. And he's been saying that since back then.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyways, go Taylor. I'm a fan.
Yeah, that's a great story.